It seems pretty smooth outside my hand here.
Okay, so maybe part of it is solar.
Actually, it does jitter every now and again. I think if all things are happening at once. So.
Okay. But am I understandable? Can you get the audio okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. Alright, well, let's get started. First of all, I have if you could maybe ping me your last name as well, DM me your last name. So I'm almost there with the grading of the exams. I will, once I'm finished and decided on the final weighing, I will DM you directly. I just need your full name. So UFO, that's who's that? Cool. John. Okay. Now, for John and Aaron, I have either bad or good news. Since you were the only ones present the last time, I decided I will have to redo the lecture again. So what I'd like you to do is to basically use this as a pre-study period where you can work on ideas for the final report. But this time I would like some kind of a deliverable at the end of it. So please use the time to create a little Word document or whatever is easier for you to use about what you'd like to do for the final project, like within your capability, and obviously using the things that we are learning. So using Unity physics, using colliders, raycasting, using some procedural generation.
Is there any yes, or is it just as you're saying there come up with an idea that makes use of?
Yeah, I'm still working on the brief. I apologize. I actually should have, but because of the Corona situation, I actually had to spend a bit of my time setting up for the delivery. So yeah, my apologies. But treat it in a way like, okay, use the time to research, get some ideas together, get back to you, and maybe as a little bit of a sorry. Yeah, if that helps, maybe we can organize a little bit of our private time at a different stage where I can go over those ideas with you as well. So today I will be mostly going through what we already went through last week. So probably there's no point for you to follow on. But you're welcome to if you think you would maybe reinforce some of the ideas. This will also be recorded, so I will post at the end. I will post the link to YouTube. Actually, hold on with me for a minute. I did want to bring up something. Going back to working with Git, okay, let me just update and refresh that. So okay, so we did mention branching in Git when I first talked about working with Git and GitHub. But this is a good example actually. So depending whether you download your project files from GitHub directly or whether you use a Git client. So let's start with those who download it from Git. I have prepared the initial project files on the master branch, and then the completed version is on the completed branch. So let me just make sure that I have closed Unity. Yeah, there we go. So all you need to do in this case is click completed here in the branch, and then you can download the specific branch zip and unzip as you always do. So this would be the final version that you're supposed to get at the end of this lecture. But we'll be starting with our master branch, which has the initial one. If you're using GitHub Desktop, the way to do this is going to be, okay, this is a different course example, but similar idea, current branch, and there you can switch between branches, and then potentially also fetch to update everything. And Git Desktop takes a little while to update, but it will do that eventually. So that's Git Desktop, and then in source tree, probably even simpler. Go into your history tab. So here you have the history of all the commits I did so far in the project for all the lectures, and here you see that I branched off at a certain stage. I created an initial version for this lecture, actually last week, and this is actually on the master branch. Meanwhile, completed is on a separate one. So switching between them, here on the branches on the left tab, you can see you can just double click and that will automatically switch it for you. Now you see that the highlighted commit is the one which is on this blue completed branch. One thing to note is that one thing to note is oh, sorry, Sabarish, I just noticed that we're able to connect to the video. On the left in the voice channels, you can see the video. You should be able to connect to it. Could you confirm that you're seeing the feed okay? Okay, let me just go to the screen. Okay, so over here. Okay, good. Alright, sorry about that, I didn't notice that I had the other server highlighted. Oh, again, the new format, and also I'm just fresh after doing the 3-hour stream for the other class. Good. Okay, so one thing to note there when you're switching branches. Okay, it could be your connection, Sabarish, as well, since it seems that people have a different experience there. Like, I have a pretty solid mic here, like I have a webcam mic, that should be okay. Is it possible you could get maybe closer to the router, the Wi-Fi router, or maybe get a wired connection? Yeah, okay, let me check that. There is, but it seemed to be working okay up until now. But let me just double check. Maybe I can just make it solid. 1, 2, 1, 2. So this has the danger of picking up, yeah, I got that. This has the danger of picking up my laptop fan. How is that sounding for you? Is that any better?
Yeah, I can hear that, or at least on my end I can hear it loud and clear. The laptop is just a little bit on in the background.
Yeah, so it's not too bad. Okay. Okay, good. Alright, so again, coming back to switching branches in Unity. When you do slightly more risky operations with GitHub, like again, maybe reverting to an older commit or switching branches, I would recommend exiting Unity when you do that for a number of reasons. Yes, Unity editor will recognize that some files have changed and will update things accordingly, but there are some settings which might not actually be updated if you have a scene open. So I ran into this a couple of times, so that's just a warning for you. So when you begin, please just set up the master, set up to be on the master branch, and pull the latest commit. So for Oren and John, as a brief for you, I'd say, yeah, give me a 1.5 page write-up, potentially with links and visual references of what you'd like to achieve, an overview of maybe gameplay ideas that you want to do, or if you want to go slightly more artistic on it and maybe focus on the actual visual. I do want this environment to be explorable by the player, so have some kind of a player controller in there. And I'd like this to use physics, colliders, and some kind of a area logic. So that's just a very, very brief hand-wavy overview. I will work up the ideas for next week, but for now, could you please get started on that? I know you've already had some ideas you were thinking about, so so yeah, 1.5 hour write-up. Use the time. You'll be a little bit. You'll have a little bit of less work to do later on with your final exam. And yeah, as a little sorry from me, maybe I can organize a little bit of time outside of the lecture to give you a bit more extra value for it, since you're missing out today. So that's that would be it. And with everybody else, well, you know, it was a bit of a special situation. I don't blame you at all for skipping class. I was quite concerned myself because this was the day before they actually decided to close or go onto online. So you know, very reasonable, understand. This is a bit of a serious situation. So. No hassle from me on that with that respect, and I'll go through today. I'll go through. Let me show you the final result. Of what we tried.
Sorry, Rob. Do you have anything else for me in the one, or can we?
I think you can head off and start off if you want. Maybe DM me if you have some other questions. I will only be able to get back to you a bit later, but yeah, use this time for like self-study at this stage, since you already did the lecture last week. So you know, it's a little bit awkward for me to do it this way, but I think if I just skip, then the rest of the class will kind of have missed out, because this lecture is quite dependent on following and me describing it. So yeah, it's probably the best option that I could come up with. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. So let me open the project. Today we will continue with Unity Physics. As you probably see, the scene to open is the scene number 8, so triggers and colliders. Please let me know, maybe let me send you Please react when you're up to speed. So if you have that scene open, the scene will be triggers and raycasts all will be open. And, yours will be triggers and raycasts begin. Okay, good. Okay. You don't. Branching is a different operation. So, what are you using? What Git client are you using? Source tree? GitHub desktop. No, you're not trying to branch. You're just switching branches. So. If this is a problem, then go back via GitHub and just download the zip. But I'm not sure exactly what you're doing on using Git desktop. The switch involves you don't need to merge. You just need to click on the branch to switch to it. So you need the master branch in this case. So let me give a quick overview of what we're trying to achieve today. We have our turret tower, a hostile turret that is going to have a certain zone around it. Let's see. Hostile turret, and you can see the zone visualized. To show the physics colliders extents, highlight the object that you're interested in, make sure that you have gizmos highlighted on the scene window. So we have a certain area that we enter with the player, and then the turret activates and starts shooting at us. I've been also told that the stream might be freezing a bit. Well, we're trying to push maybe the graphics card in this case because it's doing video compression real time and also streaming it and so on. So there probably will be a little bit of jitteriness while I play. So what's happening here is that the turret activates, starts shooting at us, but there's also something else happening there in case we are hiding behind a building. Let's try that. You see we are within the zone, like just to prove it to you, I will focus on the player. So we are actually within the zone and the turret is tracking us, but it's not shooting. So to do that we will use raycasts. So that's pretty much it, getting a little bit closer to something that resembles an actual game. Now, like I said, I'm going to do a switch between branches, so I'll close Unity, go to my source tree, and switch to the master branch. Cool, and I'm at the master branch. Just to be sure, it's good to do a pull. Probably unnecessary, but that makes sure that you're in sync with the repository. And now I open Unity again. And open the project. Triggers and wake to begin. Cool. So what do we have right now? When we begin, we just have a turret which is doing what it was doing where we left it. If you remember, we had this animation of the rotation of the gun and the dome. We used interpolation for that. Well, just to refresh your memory, let's have a look at what's happening there. By the way, this scene has been reworked a little bit. The idea is that I'd like to keep a track of our progress so that you can go back to the earlier versions of the scene and still work with them and see what's going on without having to have several projects. So that's why sometimes I fork the scripts and make different little small versions of them. So now we have hostile city manager, for example, which is basically a city manager with a little minor modifications. So let's look at that first. Everything that we had before in the city manager, only okay, we had a city building. This is a comment for several lines of code. I don't know if you've used this before. Slash asterisk, and then a corresponding asterisk slash. So I've just uncommented this code and. Yes, Sabarish, I will do that. I'm recording this, and I will post the link after I'm finished. So today or tomorrow, depending on how I quickly manage to process it, I will post a YouTube link. Okay. Right. Yeah, I understand that. Probably preferable if you have a choice to have a secondary display. There isn't really that much I can do on my side. But yes, you will have the video. You can look through this offline later. If it's an option, perhaps to maybe use a regular flat screen TV with a HDMI input, that might work. Okay. Okay, cool. Well, that's why I recorded. So yes, I will post this on the GitHub main page. I will send the link to the video. Let me start this. Okay, so we ran into a little bit of a problem there because we built some buildings right on top of our turret and made a big mess of it. So, any ideas how to prevent this? We've already done it, and you've seen an example of it in the lab test example. Any ideas? You can use voice, by the way, so feel free to interrupt me at any stage. I'm going to go back to our set slot function. If you remember, that was you should after the test anyway. There was a way of telling the game that there's something already in that location. So because the buildings are being built from the ground up, the prefabs are placed at the ground level and then are being built up. All we need to do is somehow mark out this area in the center as already built over. So I'm gonna just make another nested loop. Excuse me. And I'm gonna, just to maybe reiterate this, so this is a nested loop, two loops, one loop inside another. It's probably obvious already, but I've still seen some problems in the lab results. So this section of code in the brackets here is executed iteratively, repeatedly, and this for loop statement defines how this is happening. So we initialize our iterator, our j variable, to value of -4. This is the starting value. At the end of the execution of the block, we increment this value. So after each iteration, we increment the value. In this case, by 2. Let's change this maybe to 3. Well, in this case, apologies. In this case, we'll increment by 1, because we'd like to have a very small area in the center, and the blocks are right next to each other. So I'm going to go with this for, and over here for the outer loop, I will do something similar. So in the middle here, between the semicolons. So these are, you have to look at this as 3 parts. The first one is the initialization, what value we start with. The second one is the condition for execution. So if this is true, then proceed, do whatever is inside the loop. If not, then exit. And then we increment the iterator after we're done with our current iteration. So I have added some links to the presentation, as well as the GitHub homepage as well for you for the for loops explanation. I think you might have looked at it during the lab test as well. So yeah, I'm happy with that. -3, 4, and here I'm also incrementing by 1. So this notation plus equals, again, let me remind you, this is incrementing. So I take the original value of I, add 1 to it, and then assign this to I. Another way to write it would have been an assignment operation where I take the value of I, add 1, and assign this to I. You have to get used to this notation. Is this really clear to everyone at this stage? I was a bit surprised to see in the lab results that there's still problems with this. But if there's still some problems, let me know. We'll just, or DM me. For loops are so basic that you will need to have a good grasp of it. So this is another way of doing it. This is a post-incrementation. So after this bit of code inside the bracket here is executed for this particular loop, we increment the I value by 1. So let's see what happens now. Actually, sorry, the internals of this loop is not what I want. This was taken from another place. What I want to do is set slot, and I want to use this I and J values and true. Okay, and I think, yeah, I need to add 7 to this. Why do I add 7? Any idea? Do you remember? Anyone? The way we set up the set slot function, let me go back to it, is that it directly works with the city array. So here are the indices for the array, and these need to be between 0 and 14. So we actually have to take that into account. Let me go back to the previous. There it is. Okay. I'm having a little bit of a slowdown here on my side. If that continues, I will maybe restart the recording. Is the sound still okay, guys? Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, so by adding 7 here to these values, which correspond to the world position, I end up with our value between 0 and 15. So, cool. Okay, so this mostly worked, but there still is something amiss. For some reason, something got built in the center of the turret. It shouldn't have happened. Just out of curiosity, is this happening on your side as well when you run it? I assume you're following through. No problem. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm just wondering where did I go wrong with this? J, okay. Well, I'm gonna take a chance in case something was being built one level higher. This is a little bit hacky, but I just don't want to lose too much time on this. I'm also gonna add a slot one level above the field there, just in case that's what's happening. Well, that worked. So I think what was happening there is, oh yeah, okay, I know. It's the cast. So just because we have a slight non-zero value where we initialize those building here, let's see if we actually still need it. We do. Okay, so we've cleared the center of the city a little bit, and we can just start getting into, the important bits. So first of all, most of the time so far that we have worked with creating our code, we had kind of a sequential approach that we just create a sequence of commands that are getting called, and then maybe we do it every frame, and then do it the next frame again, and so on. But oftentimes we'd like to have some code which is run under a specific condition only. So in general, and this is not really a Unity term, this is a general programming term, these would be handled by callbacks. So a callback is a kind of general term, meaning that the method, the function is only called when something happens. So if you think about it, we've been using them all along. So start, for example, you can think of start as a specific type of callback which only happens when the object first gets placed in the scene and we enter play mode. Awake is another one which happens slightly earlier when the object is first active, and then update also is a type of callback. So, but we'd like to go into a little bit deeper into that. So in Unity, callbacks would be related to things like Unity events, actions, messages. We won't use them at this stage, but this will be a simple example of how this works. So there's a couple of special events and callbacks related to collider triggers. So let me remind you. Let's say we start with our hostile turret and add a collider. Let's go with a sphere collider. So I added a sphere collider. It's very small right now. It's size half. So let me just scale this up. Let's give it a radius of, let's say, 7. I'll be working with the inspector, so let me just switch to... Yeah. If my gizmos are enabled, I should be able to see this in the scene here. Cool. And another thing we want is check this is-trigger checkbox. We haven't used that before. Let me tell you about that. So, what this means that the collider is not going to be treated as a physical object anymore, so it won't actually be moved around. It becomes a certain zone. So, what exactly is happening there with the collider trigger? So when a game object collides with another game object, Unity calls this onTrigger enter. Only once, only the first time that you start touching the trigger collider. So you enter a room and it has a collider associated with it. Apologies. So the first time an object with a rigid body enters an area marked by a collider, which is a trigger, this onTrigger enter event is called. So there are some special conditions that need to be fulfilled for this to even work. So first of all, both of the game objects must have a collider component. Secondly, one of them must have the isTrigger enabled. Thirdly, one of them needs to have a rigid body associated with it. And then also need to remember that if both of them actually set as triggers, that nothing will happen, so there isn't actually a collision there. So we already have a rigid body set up on our player. Let's just make sure that we do. Yes, there's a rigid body there. So we're good to go. So let's do something. First of all, let's create a new script. So add a component. Let's call it turret controller. Keep in mind that if you create your script this way, just for keeping your project tidy, this will end up in the root directory there of assets. So I'm just going to move it into scripts. Okay. Let me open that. Okay, so what do we need? Any ideas? Let's set up our callback. So all you need to do is start typing onTrigger enter, and this will complete. So this, as you see, this looks similar to like the update and start methods, only it has an argument. So this is going to be the collider other. So this variable other is actually holding information about what is colliding with our trigger, or the other way around. If we are the player, and this is the player script, then this event will also get triggered, and the collider other is going to be the trigger. So let's create a Boolean flag. Let's make it a public variable. Let's call it alerted. Alright. And if this onTrigger enter event is called, then let's assign a value of true to that. What would be the default value for the alerted? Well, just when we start our game and haven't collided with anything yet. What do you think? Well, it would be 0. Each type has a certain, well, most types have a certain default value. So in this case, a Boolean would be false by default. Let's take care of onTrigger exit as well, and set alerted to false in that case. Now that still doesn't do much, but since we have exposed this variable to the inspector, we can see it do something. Well, let's try that. Okay, but what's happening? Our player is outside of the zone for sure, but still the alerted value here is going between checked and unchecked. So something's wrong here, right? What could it be? Well, let's think. We have other objects in this area. These would be the buildings. So this is most likely what's happening. In this case, we need to be more specific in our callback. and we need to actually have a look at this other that we get in that callback. So if other, so this will be, now we're looking for a logical condition inside this bracket just to, before we change this alerted value. So if other and magical dot notation, I type a dot and I can already see what I can access about this object. So I can see here that I have whether it's a flag, whether it's enabled, its material, its name, oh, a tag, great, so I'm going to use that. We know we have assigned the player tag to the player, so we can actually make it useful, and we're going to do this for both callbacks. Why do you think that we need it on trigger exit as well? Well, same reason. If there are other objects flying around in the area and they'll be entering and exiting the collider, then we don't want this to affect the operation of our targets. So let's save this and try it now. Okay, I'm looking at the target controller, I have that highlighted, and the alerted flag is false, it's not checked. So let us get a little bit closer. And you see that it turned on. And as I go outside of the area, it turns on and off. So that's the most rudimentary kind of collision-based logic or trigger-based logic. So now, I don't quite like the way this city ended up, so let's maybe fix that and maybe have a quick look at the for loops before I let you off on a break. So let's go back to our hostile city manager and see where we build the buildings here. There, we increment this loop by 2 on both counts here. So just make it a bit clearer. I want this city to be a little bit more spacious, and as you know that we've expanded our city now a little bit. If you look at the fields here, our city array goes up to 15, so we can actually use start with -7 up to 8 and then increment by 3, let's say, and do the same here. One is vertical, one is horizontal, so these will be the rows and columns of our buildings. I'd encourage you to, if this for loop nesting is still unclear, to play as much as you can, change the numbers, see what you get. It's kind of very visual and it shows you immediately what you get. So I'm expecting here the city area to be larger and the spacing between buildings to be also larger. And that's what happened. So I think this is something that's more workable for the needs of our little mini game level. Well, let's try just one quick more thing there. What is happening with the I and j iterators, or the variables that control the iteration? I highlight the variable and it shows me where it's being used in the code. So I see that it's being used here. So it's used for the position, the original position for building the prefab. This is the x coordinate, y is just very slightly off the ground, and j is the z condition axis. So taking the top view, you can see the z-axis, right? So let's change the variable that corresponds to the z-axis. Let's change the spacing to 5. Now, I apologize if I'm boring you to tears with this, but I'm still kind of... Yeah, okay, so our spacing is now a little bit irregular. So horizontally we see the spacing is 3, and vertically, or along the z-axis, the forward axis, it's larger. So play with this and get a better sense of how a nested loop works, if that still gives you trouble. So let me revert that, and let's take a 10-minute break, please. So let's reconvene. Let's reconvene 10 minutes past 2, please.